KNN. And the intention here is to provide you with machine learning process flow right from beginning, model training to deployment. And in this sequence, in this video, I'm going to be covering some of the shortcomings of KNN algorithm. So KNN is a very simple and intuitive machine learning model that we have seen so far, and it has a lot of strengths. It can be used for classification and regression tasks. However, despite its simplicity and effectiveness in most of the scenarios, KNN also has some of the shortcomings. The model comes with some of the weaknesses that can limit the performance and the efficiency of the model, particularly when we talk about the large data sets or high dimensional data sets. Means we are talking about more than 20 columns or 30 columns or 50 columns. So there are strategies and algorithms such as KD tree and ball tree which address these shortcomings. So let's get started and discuss what these KD tree and ball tree algorithms do and how they work. And then I'll show you how to use these settings in the KNN classifier or regressor. So some of the shortcomings of KNN is computationally very heavy because of the calculation that we have to do from the query point or a test point to all the training samples using a Euclidean method or any other distance measure. And it requires high memory also because the training samples need to be in the memory so that we can compute the distances. And it's sensitive to feature scaling that we have seen in our previous video, and we also talked about how we address this. In this particular video, we'll talk about the ball tree and KT tree and how they help in high dimensional data sets. Essentially, with the high dimensionality of a data set, we are also impacted by a phenomena called curse of dimensionality, where all the samples tend to move away in the geometric space and the samples tend to have or tend to be equidistant from each other, and that defeats the whole purpose of machine learning. So one of the problem with KNN is slow prediction speed, because at the time of prediction, we're going to compute the distances of the query point. Let's say we have a query point or a test point, and we have about 50,000 training samples. So we're going to compute the distances against all the 50,000 samples. So this method is called brute force method. So far that we have seen in the KNN, the method that we talked about is the brute force method. And that results in very slow query time or prediction time. This can limit the usability or user experience of the model if the model requires very high, or quick return of the predictions from the model, or very fast inferencing. If that is a requirement, then brute force method is a problem. So in the brute force method, we simply compute the distances for a given test sample. And then after computing the distances, we are going to sort the distances, arrange in the order, ascending order, most likely. And then we select the nearest neighbor. And we choose the top k instances with the smallest distance. And they are the k nearest neighbor. And after that, we make a decision. So this is how the brute force method actually works. So calculating the distance is what is very time taking. Out of all these 4 steps, this is where the bulk of time would be spent. So for example, a training set, and then this is a query point, and this results in the Euclidean distance computation. Um, by default, it is Euclidean, but it can be any other distance measure. So nonetheless, any measure that we take is going to do a computation of distance from the test to all the training samples, and that takes heavy load. That is basically computationally very heavy on the model. So we need to speed up the KNN, and the couple of methods that we can use to speed up the KNN is k-dimensional tree or ball tree. So as you could see, in both of these methods, we will not use brute force like computing, the distances of the test point from the training samples, all the training samples. That's not what we're going to do. So we will do some smart arrangement. So the arrangement is, if you have a data set, let's say 1 million samples or 50,000 or 500,000 samples, we're going to divide it into partitions. Okay, so that's the basic idea. So we will divide it into partitions, and those partitions are called a part of the tree or a subtree. So let's see, and both of these methods are pretty much similar, but there are differences in terms of pros and cons. So we will discuss each one. So let's say this is our data set and two columns. And I'm using only two column to demonstrate this, because with three column and four column, plotting would be very almost impossible. So this is the data set to the column x1 and x2, and there are 10 samples. So initially, we are going to put all the points in a single group, like one tree. And then after that, we choose a particular dimension to start with. And let's say we start with the x axis. That means the column x1 or column c1. Then we sort the data based on c1 or x coordinate. So after sorting, this is how the data would look like. There are multiple approaches to build KD tree. So I'm using one of the simplest method is to find the median point along the axis that we are working on, that is the x-axis, and let's say this is the point of median. That's like, that's the midpoint of the data, and then we can use that point as a median, and then we can divide the data. So next step is to create a node. So we're going to create a node with the median 0.5 and 0.6, and this node becomes the root of the KD tree. Now we will partition the dataset into two parts, like a left child and the right child. So the left node will have all the data points where column C1 or x coordinate is less than 0.5. Right side would be the column C2, or sorry, column C1 again, which is greater than 0.5. So we are preparing the two different, so basically partitioning the data into halves. And this process will continue. So we will have a left tree, and for the left tree again, we will repeat the same process. This time we will choose the y coordinate, and then we follow the same process. We will divide it into two parts, the left side and the right side. Same thing with the right subtree also. We will look at the right subtree and choose the y coordinate now, because previously we looked at the x coordinate, now the other column. And based on that, we will repeat exactly the same process. So eventually, you will have something like this. You start here, and then there's a left node, there's a right node, and each of the node can be ideally, each of the node will have more than one sample, and we will see why it is so. The reason is each of the node is like a partition, and if my test point falls in this partition, I would like to get all my neighbors also from this particular partition. So there is another parameter which scikit-learn provides, and that controls or that ensures that you have that many samples in each of the node as minimum. We'll see that those parameters when we look at the Python code. So essentially, if we don't use the parameter, then eventually the last node we will have only one single sample, and that's not what we are looking for. So each of the partition, we would like to find k number of neighbors. So each of the partition must have at least k number of samples in that particular partition. So that is ensured by the parameter called leaf size. Essentially, what leaf size does is it tells KD tree in a node, if the number of samples is less than leaf size, do not further split. That's what it is. And that will ensure that we will have at least that many samples in each of the partitions. So a little bit of a demo using a Python code. Let's say this is our data set on the left hand side. Right hand side, I started with EX and this is the median. And I started with Y and this is the median. Now you look at it, the data set has been divided into four partitions, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, given a test point, let's say the test point falls here, we would find the neighbors in this particular region or in this particular partition. But the algorithm can be smart enough if it is not finding the required number of neighbors in the partition, then it can backtrack and go to a closest partition and find those neighbors. That's slightly complicated, the structure of the algorithm, but these algorithms work in a very efficient manner. So the search process is going to be to find the nearest neighbor. Let's say for a point, we will start with the root node and we will follow the tree in exactly the same pattern that we built the tree. For example, let's say we use column C1 to start with, then column C2, then column C3. So we will follow exactly the same pattern to travel down the partitions and reach the partition where your closest neighbor might be there. So we're going to compare the test point with the splitting hyperplane associated. That means criteria that we used to like median. So we're going to compare with that, and then we travel either left or right depending on the value in that particular coordinate and the hyperplane. So this way we will travel down the tree left or right of the node, or go into the left child partition and the right child partition. And we're going to repeat this process until we reach the desired leaf node. So once the leaf node is reached, we can find out, we will consider all the points in that particular partition. If the leaf node contains only one data point, then that is the nearest neighbor. But usually we will control this by using the leaf size parameter, and that will ensure we have that many minimum number of samples in each of the partition. Suppose for some reason our leaf size is smaller than the number of neighbors that we want. In that case, the KD tree can backtrack, or it can consider more than one partition and exactly do the same process, find the k nearest neighbor among those closed partitions and return you the prediction. So this is how the KD tree actually works. The leaf size parameter is there to control or ensure the minimum number of samples exists in the partition. That means you're telling KD tree, do not split if the number of samples in a node is less than the leaf size. So now when to use carry tree? As you see here, carry tree is simply going by columns and dividing it. And if you have let's say 200 columns and you keep on dividing, essentially we are creating lots of partition, and that is computationally also inefficient, and for search also that is quite a problem. So KD tree is particularly good if you have number of columns around, let's say 10, 15, or 20, not more than 20. So if it is less than 20, then KD tree certainly is one of the options that we should look at. So the limitation of a KD tree, it is less effective in a very high dimensional spaces. For example, 200 column, 300 column. In that situation, we are not going to consider KD tree. KD tree can also result in irregularly distributed data if the data has skewed patterns. So that's going to be a problem with the KD tree. KD tree requires a lot of memory initially to build the tree during the training time. And once the tree is built, that's pretty much static. That means if the new samples come in your data stream, you cannot dynamically update the tree. You have to build the tree afresh. So that means KNN in all forms is not good for online machine learning model. So next, I'm going to talk about the ball trees. Now, here's things look better when it comes to very high dimensional data set. So ball trees are a type of space partition data structure and is very efficient in case of a very high dimension, let's say 50 or 100 or 200 column. And in those situations, of course, we are not going to look at brute force or carry tree. So if you have more than 100 column, 200 column, we can try ball tree. So just to give you a depiction here, this is not the right picture here, but you get an idea. Let's say your data set. So we start with keeping all the data in one ball or one partition, and after that, the algorithm will try to divide the partition into halves, like equal, and you can see the points belonging to the subtrees or the sub balls, you can say. So it's pretty much works the same way like KD tree is going to start at the root node and then it will travel to the it will find out whether this root node or the node is the end of it, like it's a leaf node. If not, it will continue to recursively find out the ball where the matching neighbors could be found. So when to use ball tree is very effective in a high dimensional data sets, especially the text data with a high number of words feature or genetic data dealing with gene expressions or image data. It is quite useful. And also, if the data has a non-Euclidean space, that means no straight line, it can be a curve, nonlinear. In that case, we can use ball tree. So let's take a look at the Python demo, and I'll show you how to use scikit-learn with the parameters that you need to tweak in order to use KD tree and ball tree. Okay, so here's the code here, some dummy data. I'm generating random data. This is what I used in these slides. And then I have a function which can split. So this is our original data. Now I can construct manually the KD tree, which is not what we will do. We will use a scikit-learn package to do it, but just to show you how we divide it into partitions. So now you have the partitions here, and if your test point falls in this region, then these neighbors in this partition become your lookup area. But as I mentioned earlier, if your number of neighbors is more than the number of samples in the partition, then the KDT can backtrack and look at the other partitions which are nearby and find the number of neighbors. So how we implement KD trees? So there is a package called KD tree. You can use that, or better still, you can use the K neighbors and then mention KD tree as a parameter, and also mention the leaf size as another parameter to ensure the splitting of the node is ensuring that you have that many number of neighbors that you want present in the node. And rest of the process is pretty much the same. You can fit and classify, predict and compute the score. And exactly the same thing with the ball tree. The ball tree can also be implemented directly using a ball tree package. If you're not comfortable, you can use scikit-learn again, and in scikit-learn, there is a parameter algorithm, and you set it to ball tree. And leaf size, you can tune to whatever value that you want. And rest of the steps are pretty much the same. So that's it in the code here. So we talked about the shortcomings of the KNN model, essentially in terms of the brute force method being computationally very heavy, and how we address that by using KD tree and ball tree. I hope